Okay, so this is joint work with Sagiri, Katau, and Lars Lundquist. Okay, so here's the deal. This talks about the following. On the left-hand side, on the top, there's unemployment rates in the United States and Europe, and actually France. United States is red. That's 1970, and U.S. had a higher unemployment rate. That's by age. When I went to graduate school, the big puzzle was why Europe had a lower unemployment rate than the United States. If you look at the labor force participation rate, that's below. These figures are due to Rob Scheimer. They're roughly the same in the United States and Europe, red and. But if you go to 2004 or various other places, look at the unemployment rate on the right. It's flipped. The U.S. by all ages is systematically lower than Europe. And if you look at labor force participation on the bottom right panel, what's happened is, Krugman plays this up. Between 30 and 55, it's the same in Europe and the United States. But early in the lifespan and late in the lifespan, Europe is systematically lower than the United States. So our paper is basically a response to Rob Scheimer, who asked us some questions, which I'll show you. So this is going to be an extension of earlier work by Lars and me, in which we used a kind of a souped-up version of a McCall search model, and we stuck very close to McCall. We had no savings. We had human capital, but we had no savings. We had no risk aversion. And I'll tell you some things that we added. This is going to be what it's going to amount to is an extended robustness exercise on some of our earlier work that's designed to capture some more, to meet some challenges that Rob Scheimer and other people pose for us. So I'm just going to keep going. So this is the line of work that we're on. So the inspiration of the new things from in the current paper relative to what we've done in the past, we're going to take some things from Heckman, Lochner, and Tabor. We're basically going to take a Ben Perath human capital technology that we didn't have before. It's going to play a role. We're going to take from Mortensen and Pissarides a model of firm entry and exit. We got questions about, you don't have firms in your model. Like there's no firms in the McCall model. There's going to be firms in this model. They're going to be imported from Mortensen and Pissarides. And from them, we're going to have a firm productivity shock process. They drew theirs from a uniform process, and they had an arrival rate at which they generated a Markov process by having a uniform distribution and an arrival rate that told when the productivity levels shifted. We're going to change their process a little bit. From Derek Neal, we're going to take this is part of the way we're going to meet a challenge Rob Scheimer posed for us. We're going to take Derek Neal's paper about his observations about young workers doing a lot of churning, doing a lot more job churning than older workers, and Derek has an explanation of this. We're going to hardwire. I don't use the word reduce form. We're going to hardwire this in. And then from Heathcote, Storsladen, and Violante, we're going to give workers subject to a transitory earning shock, which they indicated was important. It's going to be important for us to match certain observations. Okay, so we're going to do this extension of this turbulence theory. I'll come back and tell you about that. What we did in 1998, we had unemployment benefits were playing a big role. They will here. To get some additional observations, we added layoff costs. That was a key to explaining the difference, why Europe had suppressed unemployment in the 1950s and 60s relative to the United States. Layoff costs played a big role. They're going to play a big role here. And then what we're going to add here is minimum wage that we didn't have before. Minimum wage is going to play a key role for young people in Europe. And that's going to help us hit something that we didn't get before and that Rob challenges us for. Okay, and then here's one other thing. I've just added this to the Scheimer picture. If you look below, this is going to be important for us. One thing that's changed between the 1980s and today is benefit dependency rates. They've stayed roughly the same in the United States or even gone down. And in Europe, they've gone up. And they've gone up, how they've gone up across age groups is going to be important. Okay. So here's going to be the outcome of our model. We're going to, as Jeremy said, we're going to have this, we're going to have tranquil times when there's, it's kind of Jeremy's world, where you lose a job, you just lose a job, but you don't lose extra human capital. And then we're going to have that shock that Jeremy was talking about yesterday. If you lose a job, you get a second phone call and you get told, not only did you lose your job, X percent of your human capital is gone. Lucas did that to me. That ISLM stuff that you learned at Harvard, it's no longer useful. Okay, so in tranquil times, the outcome of our model is that's age. In tranquil times, Europe has a lower unemployment rate by all ages than the United States. In turbulent times, when that second shock is activated, things change. Okay, and in the direction that Rob Scheimer's graph has. And I'm going to show you how we're going to play that. We're going to play the game the following way. Put our cards on the table. Okay, this is the Milton Friedman model. I heard Milton Friedman talk to Gorbachev in 1990, and what he said is Russians are just the same as Americans, and the only reason outcomes are different is institutions are different. And that's going to be our model. In our model, the Europeans, everything about the Europeans and the technology is going to be the same as the US. The only thing different across the two continents are going to be government policies. So keep that in mind. So we're going to get, all of this is going to be explained by actually constant government policies. They're going to be the same government policies in the early period and in the late period. And this is a good article Paul Krugman said is, you can't explain the higher unemployment rates that you have in the United States now by pointing to bigger safety nets and government institutions, because those safety nets were always more generous in Europe. So we're going to have an interaction of those safety nets and government institutions with something that changed in the environment. And what it's going to be is this human capital shock distribution. So that's where we're going. Okay, so now I'm just going to, if I do this right, I'm going to tell you about the people that live in our model, the opportunities they have, and what's going on. And if, when I'm done with this, everything else should be just downhill. So this is going to be an overlapping generation search island model. You'll see where this is influenced by Lucas and Prescott. There's going to be indivisible labor. There's going to be a limited kind of ex-ante heterogeneity that's going to be important. There's going to be two types of people, high and low. Okay, it's going to be like Mark Wright's model yesterday. There's going to be the ages of person. There's going to be three phases. There's going to be a phase of youthful inexperience. That's the first phase. And then there's going to be a part where you're experienced, and you're going to transition those with a just a probability. You're going to stochastically forget this. No, you're not going to stochastically age. You're going to age like, unfortunately, like we do during this experience period, and then you're going to have to retire. There's going to be a mandatory retirement, and that's going to matter in ways that we'd like to relax. During this inexperienced phase, what you're doing is you're basically a McCall worker, and you draw from a productivity distribution. You can't do anything to affect it, which distribution you draw from is based on your type, whether you're high or low. Once you become experienced, quote unquote, you're in control of your job productivity, partly because you get this Ben Porath human capital accumulation technology. That's what happens. And furthermore, what's going to happen, I told you we're going to hardwire this in. There's going to be an exogenous job destruction rate. It's higher when you're inexperienced than when you're experienced. Why are we doing that? Because we're going to try to, one reason we're going to do that is we want to hit Derek Neal's observations of a lot of churning. And then there's ex-ante heterogeneity, and there's going to be a lot of ex-post heterogeneity. So the ex-post heterogeneity is there's going to be, because of this geometric Yari type structure, how much time it takes you to become experienced is going to vary. There's going to be job search luck. You're going to search for jobs. You're going to search for, in the Lucas Prescott sense. There's going to be job destruction luck. Your firm's going to get destroyed in a Mortensen-Pissarides type way. Your human capital investments, they're going to pay off stochastically, like that ISLM stuff. And they're going to depreciate stochastically at job destruction. And then there's going to be, okay, come back to this. Okay, so then, now here's what the government's going to do. The top is what the people are doing. What the government's going to do is going to impose labor and capital taxes. It's going to impose a layoff tax. It's going to be different. These things are going to be different across the two continents. They're the only things that are different across the two continents. There's going to be unemployment UI benefits. They're going to be more liberal in Europe than they are in the United States. There's going to be an unfunded social security system. That's going to matter. And there's going to be a minimum wage. That's going to be effective in Europe during certain periods, but not in others. And it's not going to be in the United States. And then here's what people are going to have, these concave utility functions in consumption. So they want a smooth consumption. It's different than some stuff Lars and I had earlier in the McCall model. They want to smooth their consumption. How can they do it? We're going to let them, in a Bewley tradition, we're going to let them trade a risk-free asset whose rate of return is going to be determined in equilibrium a la Iagari. They can invest in human capital. They can smooth that way. That's the same as career planning. They can rely on a social safety net. And in some places and sometimes people are going to do that. Or they can rely on Social Security. That's it. So that's it. So now I'll just tell you the same thing.
Given that these policies are just exogenously specified.
Absolutely.
I mean, but you said, well, you didn't want to repeal the culture, so I don't know. Why did they show up?
I'm not appealing the culture, and I will not answer that.
It seems relevant. You want to talk about change in policy.
So here's the spirit of this. I'm just going to tell you what we did, and I'm not going to be defensive about why we did it. It's just we're going to calibrate these institutions. We're going to take these institutions as given, and we're going to calibrate what the government does to what we think we observe in Europe and in the United States. And we're not going to give any rationalization for them. Yeah.
I wonder why you condition the Ben Porath human capital technology on workers being experienced, because I mean it's...
You don't, I'm just going to tell you, it's hard wiring. Okay, ultimately, when you ask me why I did something, I'm going to say because I wanted to. I was just going to play it by that word. So I'm not going to say reduced form. The inexperienced phase, there's going to be a lot of churning. Human capital would be a sideshow. And And we're just going to hardwire that in. It's going to interact with something important. That's it.
But the churning could be learning, right? Well, that's another theory that's out there.
But it's not going to be ours.
Okay. But that's human capital. That first.
It's not. It's just not what we're going to do. So okay. So here's this. Could we have done the following, or could Lundquist have done the following? Could he have? Could he have gone in and Ronnie Pavin is here? Could he, based on that work, have gone through and put a Pavin, Neil type career learning thing in there and gotten this as an outcome? Yes. And that outcome, Steve Stern's pals would call that a reduced, our thing might be a reduced form for them. That's that bad language. But that's not what we're doing. Okay. Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out what's the role of the layoff tax. You can tell me. We just want.
It's going to do. So there's okay. So I'll point you to a paper by Lars Lundquist. So there's in different structures. In some kinds of structures, if you put a layoff tax, it'll increase unemployment equilibrium. In others, it'll decrease unemployment. And the nature of our model, it's going to suppress unemployment. In certain episodes. To anticipate, that's what it's going to do.
I'll wait to see one.
Okay, good.
Is the layoff tax, are the revenues from that being used to balance the budget or anything like that? Or are they
You'll
just
see.
lost money?
You'll see what it's going to do.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So is there any population growth?
No.
So that might be something that you could put in, just if you looked at the demographic structure in 1970 and 2004, they would be pretty different.
So ours is going to be, you're going to see where that could be important. Because there's going to be effects that could exacerbate, and it would might change some of our calibrations, but okay. 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 So I'll just revisit this, and I'll show you more about the people in this economy, and I'll tell you about some parameters that are going to be important. It's going to be rational expectations. That's a conditional expectation of a standard. The curvature is log, and there's going to be a b sub t. You don't like to work, and this is going to be there's bt, and bt is going to be there's going to be three values of regimes of bt. If you don't work, it's 0. If you don't work but you're searching, there's a search cost. It's a utility cost of searching, and it's going to be important. And the number b, that's the disutility of work when you're employed. That's going to be a critical number for us. I'll just alert you. So if I was going to talk about identification, that number, actually, outcomes are going to be very curved with respect to that. Okay. So I'll tell you about this. Here's your life. You're inexperienced, and I tell you what you're doing. You transit with probability pi. We made that up. When you're inexperienced, you draw. When you're unemployed, you draw in. What do you call it? Efficiency units of labor from that distribution. I is whether you're low type or high type, so you draw from different distributions. So when you're experienced, you get access to this human capital technology, and it's Ben Perath. It can be interpreted in various ways. You allocate some time not to producing product, but to producing human capital, and we're going to convert that technology into a transition density. We're going to use discrete state dynamic programming. So there's going to be some human capital levels. You go from this to this. indexed by L, and we're going to take that and get that. That's going to be one density. But there's going to be another density. So with turbulence, so that's what I think is the first phone call. You got fired. Here's the second phone call. Oh, actually, your human capital H prime, which you invested in last time, got depreciated. And this is going to be another transition probability, and it's going to be headed south, only headed south. And this is only going to be turned on in the after 1980. Okay? So again, the environment's going to be exactly the same except for that. So then we have these two continents. The people are just the same. The governments are doing different things. For reasons we don't say why. The things that they're doing are not at variance with the data. The things that they're doing resemble the data. That's the whole point. But then the one thing that's going to change between the earlier period and the later period is that thing. Something about the environment has changed. And it's that. Okay. So that's what people do. Let me tell you about firms. This is taken exactly from Morton's and Pissarides. And just to tell you what we're going to do, I told you what the people are going to do. People are of different ages. So they're all, I'll show you the state variables later. So there's a lot of post heterogeneity because of the way luck sends them through their state variables. But that's what the people are doing. And then I'm going to tell you about the firm. If you know Morton's and Pissarides, this is going to be a Morton's and Pissarides firm. Okay, and what are the firms in there? There's going to be searching. So here's going to be the vision. It's Lucas Prescott supplemented by Alvarez Verrocchierto. So with Lucas Prescott, so here's the thing. Guys are searching. What are they searching for? So this is going to be like you're going to have search, but you're also going to have Walrasian equilibrium. That's the Lucas Prescott shrewd trick. So what you're searching for is you're searching for the labor market. And once you find it, there's just going to be a market clearing wage. There's going to be a demand for labor generated by these Morton's and Pissarides firms, and there's going to be a supply of effective units of labor. We're just going to clear that every period. There's going to be a lot of heterogeneity across firms, but that's what's going on. And that's going to simplify things for us, just like it simplified things for Lucas and Prescott and Alvarez and Verrocchierto. So here's what these single firms are going to do. They have a Morton's and Pissarides style production function. And what does the firm do? It's a Morton's and Pissarides one firm, one worker outfit. That's what it is. They draw a there's a productivity shock, firm specific Z. It's going to follow a Markov process. It's going to sit still until a Morton's and Pissarides event goes off. It's going to be drawn from and then it's going to be redrawn from a distribution. It's going to stay the same, redrawn. That's it. So that distribution and that arrival probability of those Morton's and Pissarides productivity events are going to be important parameters, because what that's going to ignite, such as it is, endogenous job creation, destruction by the firms. There's going to be some exogenous, just like Morton's and Pissarides, there's going to be some exogenous job destruction. We got to do that to toss guys out of work so that there's some search activity in a continuing way. There's going to be a Morton's and Pissarides cost of posting a new job, that mu. That's what that is. So then what workers are doing, if they don't have a job, they're searching. They're searching for that. And this is just taken from Fernando and Marcelo. When they exert search effort S, they get disutility B of S. And what do they get in return? They have a probability big S of finding that job market, finding a job. If they find the job market, they got a job. Okay? So then the idea is workers and firms are randomly matched each period. So we do some things to ease our analysis in the spirit of Lucas and Prescott. There's a bunch of timing stuff. There's an anonymous labor market with market clearing wage per unit efficiency unit of labor. That's it. That's what's going on. So we're
N is the human capital that the worker brings to work at that firm.
just say again.
N is the human capital. I'm trying to relate
Yes.
N to the H times 1 minus.
I'm going to show you what he brings in. Yes, that's the answers. That's effective units of labor. And so here's the deal: is we're randomly matched. You're a really high human capital guy. Your effective units are high. I hire a lot of capital to work with you. Somebody else is low. That's what's going on. Okay, so in the Mortenson's Pissarides tradition, Q is going to be a probability of a, well, that's going to be chosen by the firm. It's going to terminate some jobs. It's going to be a threshold rule. There's going to be exogenous destruction, and then if you're an inexperienced guy, your jobs get destroyed faster. That's hardwired to get the.
I guess
okay.
I'm struggling on the market clearing wage in the setup.
Say again?
I'm struggling with the market clearing wage in the setup. I don't see. I understand Lucas Prescott, how it works there, but here you have heterogeneous firms, heterogeneous workers. Some firms are happy about the, they find a better worker.
They're all going to be. I don't know whether they're going to be happy or not, but we stick them. Okay, we're going to stick them with a bunch of stuff to make everything all worked out. So you get whatever worker you have. I'll show you a slide later. So you're struggling with it. I struggle with it too. We've rigged up the timing exactly of what's happening. I guess you'd call it meta timing inside a period, the order of events, to make everything fit together.
Oh, wait.
Okay. Okay, so there's a branch point. I can that Lars and I just moved a slide to the end. If I spend a lot of time on that now, it's an absorbing state. Okay, for various reasons. Okay, so now I'm going to show you. So that slide's gone for now. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you a bunch of Bellman equations. So, okay, so what's an equilibrium? It's an equilibrium is going to be a bunch of stuff that attain a bunch of Bellman equations. So what I should just tell you is the states. So there's going to be financial assets. There's going to be something about gamma, whether you're entitled to UI benefits. That's going to measure how long you've had the benefits. It's going to be important in the U.S. I mixed up. No, that's the benefits you get. There's going to be the duration, the elapsed duration of benefits. That's your age. Those are your if you're inexperienced, that ends your efficiency units. That's your human capital if you're experienced. There's a skill type. There's your consumption. Those are choice variables. Search intensity, investment, and skills. Okay, so I'll just there's too much to absorb in there. There's a Bellman equation and a value function for an inexperienced unemployed, for an inexperienced employed. There's one of those for each type. Then if you're experienced, notice more stuff comes in your Bellman equation. If you're experienced unemployed, experienced employed, if you're old and retired, and if you're a firm. And Rob's question is about seeing through what your state, if you're a firm, is Z when you came in that you drew. Okay, good.
How long should we think of the period?
A period?
Yeah.
It's 2 months.
Yeah, it's calibrated. The numbers are calibrated. Yeah. That's going to matter in a little bit when I calculate. So now, my aim is to give you a reader's guide, like where the sensitive points are. So I'm going to tell you that. This is in the macro tradition, whatever that means. This is an A macro tradition, and Lars Hansen's not in town. So there are going to be some parameters that are just set outside the model. And what these are going to be, There's going to be some government, there's going to be some aspects of government policies. There's going to be a production technology. There's going to be an interest rate. There's going to be parameters calibrated within the model, and it's going to be kind of done block recursively because of the structure of the model. There's going to be a subjective discount factor. That's important. Okay, what's our model about? It's not about the U.S. economy or Europe. It's about the bottom 95% of the people. It's a fraction. We're going to choose the subjective discount factor to hit the wealth hit by the bottom. So nothing about Pareto tails. The Ben Prath technology, we're going to that's going to be calibrated to hit earnings profiles. Search technology, I'll show you some things. Average unemployment duration. Idiosyncratic firm productivity, the Mortons and Pissarides. It's going to be these Bob Hall numbers, average number of jobs held over a lifetime. And the equilibrium responses to layoff taxes. Because that Mortons and Pissarides stuff with the job destruction, that's going to affect how many jobs a normal American or European is going to have to get. And then the disutility of work, that's going to be a key parameter. And it's going to be that we're going to target that. I'll show you a graph. It's going to be targeted across time and cross contingency unemployment and unemployment rate. That's going to be important in Europe and the United States in various times. And then something about permanent earnings volatility. So that's where we're disciplining those parameters. And then, so that's where we get the I guess this would be called, this is pretentious. This would be called, what a data science. They call this something, and they call this validation. So what we're going to do is after we get those, we didn't calibrate to those things. We're going to see how well we do with those things. That's the idea. Those weren't targets.
Don't you have a problem with capital in equilibrium? The 95%, about 95%, not going to explain that much of capital health.
It's a good question. You might object to something we're going to do with the graph. Yeah.
You're talking about the capital that I've got to work with, not who owns it. He's worried about who owns it.
That's the other
No,
thing.
no. I think he's worried about. Okay,
I was trying to make it a general equilibrium model.
it is going to be.
What is it, Steve?
Okay, so anything's a general equilibrium model. So almost anything.
The interest rate is fixed.
Yeah, it's going no, but this interest rate's not going to be fixed. And your point's a good one because we're going to take that graph. We're going to show is it's the capital that's generated by this life cycle things. It's probably too low because we're.
So this, as Bob says, I mean, there are 5% of people not in the model,
Yeah.
and they hold 50% of the capital stock. They are not model. To model that one, we have to go to
Yeah.
Christina's model about entrepreneurship and so on to try to explain this very skilled way.
But Steve's question is like there's a gap. So okay, this model is my understanding of this model is those guys just aren't here. So there's something funny about what we calibrate to. Okay.
So at the very beginning, you had those beautiful slides of employment and unemployment and non-participation explicitly.
Yeah, because they're yours.
But what is it? I know, that's why I just.
Say again?
What are they, what's non-participation in the model? Is this people who said ST to zero? I mean, I know there's the older workers, but what's a 40-year-old non-participant here?
Okay, so the graph I'm going to show you is just unemployment.
So we're not talking about employment versus unemployment. I thought you were going to explain the three states.
I'll show you what I'm going to explain later, and I'll come back to that, and you'll see what I deliver. Just let me get this. We are going to explain those things.
So as the OECD says, We take disability insurance, long-term sickness in Europe, the OECD say they are unemployed. So we just follow OECD, you put everyone on unemployment.
Yeah.
So, so you take your curves, participation or lack of participation, add unemployment, that sum is our unemployment.
That's what, I'm sorry?
And to sum it up, that is what we call unemployment in our analysis.
Yeah, our unemployment guy is including lots of people that withdrew from the labor force but are that are able-bodied. They prematurely withdraw for various reasons.
So you think it's closer to 1 minus employment for men?
Yes.
So now I'm confused about the public expenditures clear satisfy the government
Yeah.
constraint. So if we have the missing 5%,
Okay, so let me just, okay, so that's one issue, and then this may not make you feel any better. This is Sims Prescott back solving. What we get last is government expenditures. We don't start with it. We're going to use that as a residual to clear things. You want a government budget constraint, we get it. We're not going to tell you much about that number. Okay, so with the government, so now I have to tell you about, so the deal here is this is going to be the government in the US and Europe, these numbers. Okay, so here's the deal. So the way this is going to look is I'm going to go down here and tell you where we got some numbers, and the numbers, we're going to get them from here. So this is in the calibration tradition. So in the US, the replacement rate, we're going to set at 60%. In the US, you get it for 6 months. In Europe, you get it of unlimited duration. That's the deal. And yeah, these are fairly conservative. Here's where we got that from. Job destruction tax. There isn't one in the US. There is one in Europe. And we set it at a conservative number. Numbers are probably bigger than that, at least in some countries. Minimum wage. We're not going to have it in the US. We might have it. We might have one, an effective one later, but not now. In Europe, the answer is in turbulent times there's going to be an effective minimum wage. It's going to matter. And it's going to hit these Derek Neal type hardwired guys. A labor income tax and Social Security tax. We get those numbers from there. The tax rate's higher in Europe than the United States. There's capital tax, retirement benefits, that's Social Security, and public consumption. We're going to get that as a residual. Okay. So then I'll show you the Ben Perath technology. So we rigged it so that for low types and high types, that's what the dotted things are from some data, and those are what we get from our numbers. Okay, now this is going to be important, and I'm going to rush through. That's how we calibrate. Okay, once we calibrate things, this is what our asset profiles look like. Guess what? The high types end up accumulating more assets and running them down. This is life cycle where you don't care about any kids. It's actually going to be important. That's going to be important for us. And that's what consumption profiles look like. And that parameter beta is really important for that. And then for the that's an annual number, right? That's an annual number. Okay, and then got a bunch of parameters. There's survival probabilities; those matter. Okay, so then there's data on the average number of jobs held. Here's what happens in our model in the U.S. and Europe. Okay, so this is going to be really important. Okay, so that red line, those are those are parameters that attain. Those are parameters that attain the. Remember, the physical economies are the same in Europe and the United States. They're the same. So that red line, those are the locus of that Mortensen-Pissarides arrival. These are Mortensen-Pissarides parameters. There's a 2-parameter that attain the U.S. job turnover data, and the blue lines are parameters that suppress European unemployment in tranquil times by 1.5 points relative to the U.S. that get those, given the layoff tax that we've calibrated. So that's how we picked that number. And so there's an intricate calibration of that layoff cost, and it interacts with those Mortensen-Pissarides parameters. I don't have to tell you. Okay, and finally this thing that Jeremy was talking about. This is going to be important in what we call turbulent times. There's going to be this second phone call, and more turbulence is going to mean, you got a bigger human capital loss. And we're going to use that. So that's the deal. So if there's an exogenous job destruction, in tranquil times, this thing's not activated. In turbulent times, it is. That's it. Okay. So then I can kind of tell you the punchline and then stop. Okay. So so this is European unemployment by type in tranquil times. Okay. This is what it looks like in turbulent times. Okay. And this is kind of where we came in. So this is without a minimum wage. If there's no minimum wage, in turbulent times, and I'll show you why this happens. I'll show you why this happens with some search activity. So in tranquil times, the U.S. and these two types, it looks like this. But in turbulent times, especially these low type guys, but also the high type guys, when they get older, they withdraw from the labor force. But not much is happening at the lower end. The lower end looks just like it did in tranquil times. So this fails the Scheimer criticism. So now we take on the minimum wage, and with that churning. And now what happens is, in turbulent times with a minimum wage, this looks much more like qualitatively the graphs that Scheimer gave us, or used on us, I guess I'd say. Okay, so then things that we get. So one thing we get from this is we get between the 50s and 60s and the 80s and 90s and 2000s, the volatility, permanent and transitory earnings shocks, there's evidence that those changed. And our model has them change in ways that Gottschalk and Moffat found them. I'm just going to tell you, the disutility of work is a really important parameter. Okay. So we have lots of stuff about unemployment and who's bailed out. In Europe, it's the older guys who've bailed out, and they've I wouldn't be here in Europe. Okay, I'll show you. So I'll show you. So here's the key thing that's kind of driving our model. This is a ticking time bomb under European institutions. It doesn't do any damage in the 50s and 60s. It's not activated, but it's a time bomb because when the environment changes, these decision rules are going to cause trouble. That's search intensity. So this is age, and that's human capital. And the way this should read is these guys. If you're in this red region, if you're below the red line, you're searching full bore. If you're above the blue line, you're not searching at all. You've bailed out. And so what's true is in tranquil times, most people are down here. Most people are down here. But what's going to happen is, or they're in here. What's going to happen is, this is a ticking time bomb, because when we turn on that turbulence shock, that earnings-related unemployment compensation or disability or whatever, it's going to send people into that blue region. That's the same thing. That's high-type workers. So especially these guys, this human capital loss is going to send people. That's what's driving our model. So we pull out of this in the calibration tradition. I'll advertise this thing. This looks like a Jacobson, Lalonde, Sullivan graph in their famous paper. Our model generates the work time. When somebody loses a job and loses a lot of human capital, our American workers look like Sullivan, Lalonde workers. Our European workers, they go on the government-financed retirement. So one final thing is, this was an extended robustness operation, robustness analysis, and what we've done is we've imported some forces that were in that original McCall search model, and we asked, are they robust? And the answer is, they are robust in some environments, but not in others. So here is a search matching or a search island model, they come through. They do not come through in a Rogerson-Hansen employment lottery model. It won't work.
All right, thanks for inviting me to discuss this very nice paper. Thanks to the authors also for being great authors to discuss. I got the paper weeks ago. The discussion slides were there a long time ago. The paper was very clear. The only thing that's not completely clear is the title. You see the title, Transatlantic. You think it's a paper about sailors, pilots, and flight attendants. Turns out it's about people on the opposite side of the Atlantic. So it's one of the questions. So it's a question that has been around for quite some time. So we had lower unemployment in Europe compared to the United States until the 1960s. And the divergence in labor market outcomes from the 1970s, 1980s forward. And this is particularly pronounced at the end of the life cycle, so it's a large increase in youth unemployment and long-term unemployment for older workers in Europe, but not in the United States. Throughout this entire period, as they point out, there has been more employment protection in the United States, in Europe compared to the United States, both before and after this change. So you wonder, what kind of shock, what kind of force can explain this change. What this paper is arguing is that the economic environment, also the political environment, was constant, but what changed was change in the economic environment in the sense of economic turbulence. There was larger shocks hitting workers. The particular form of turbulence in this paper is this destruction shock of human capital. So in the initial state, in the pre-1960s, pre-1970s state of the model, if you get unemployed, you do not get that second phone call. Nobody in the 60s got the phone call that the ISM model is no longer relevant. That just didn't happen. But then somehow from the 1970s, 80s onward, that did happen. And so it kind of drives this idea that there was a faster change in the economy, maybe more skills to be learned, a higher likelihood of depreciation that correlates with being laid off. And so this higher turbulence in the model that generates more unemployment, in particular at the young age because of the minimum wage, and at the old age because of generous unemployment compensation. So what happens is that older people in the European version of the model lose their job. They're 55 years old. They get a fairly generous unemployment compensation, which in the model lasts forever. And so then you just say, well, I will just stop searching or search very little. I will just sustain on this unemployment compensation until I officially retire. This could correspond to official unemployment, could correspond to being on disability, could correspond to being in some official early retirement scheme. Okay, so what are my comments about this paper? So I think it's a very good paper. It has many successes. To some extent, of course, it's already a question that's been asked for many, many years, also by the same authors. And so to some extent, it's an elaboration of an existing research program. But I think it's a very important elaboration because it's taking the direction of the research program towards the life cycle. And as you can kind of see from the data, that's really a very essential thing to do because this difference in unemployment between Europe and US really are about the life cycle. It's about young workers and old workers. It's not about the middle-aged workers. So while people have been asking this question for a while, doing this particular step, I think, is a very essential one that really gets much closer to what really drives the data than what we had before. And the model is quite successful in terms of the outcomes, as you saw in some of the pictures. So you see, first of all, a good match for this differential impact on unemployment and early retirement in US and Europe, but also other life cycle features such as the lifetime earnings and wealth profiles. Not a big surprise because we've been doing that for a while in these kinds of models, but also labor market features, such as this decline in job transitions of the life cycle. There's a lot of going from job to job in young age and not so much in old age. And so it matches all those things at the same time as also being able to understand how change in turbulence has differential impacts of US and Europe. So in some sense, it's a really beautiful thing. It's kind of what we try to do in science is to explain a lot with very little. Everything is held constant. Only one thing changed, only this turbulence. And then beautiful things happen in terms of matching the data for both the European and the US version. Of course, being a simple explanation kind of makes you wonder, is it maybe too simple? Did they kind of change the right thing? Did they hold the right thing constant? So I will talk a little bit about this. More as a suggestion for future research maybe than a critique of the current model. So, yes?
Am I right that two actually things changed, turbulence and the minimum wage?
So the minimum wage was kind of there before, but they look at the change both with the minimum wage and without a minimum wage, is at least my understanding.
To get the youth, they need the minimum wage to go up, as I understood it.
But you kicked it in only when the turbulence changed, right?
Is that right? Okay, so then in that case, it's for that version, it's two things. So I think one thing we want to understand a bit more.
Sorry, can we just clarify? Is it that the minimum wage only binds once turbulence goes into effect, or that there's a change in the minimum wage policy at the same time that turbulence changes?
So my understanding was that it's the latter, that it only binds once you have turbulence, but maybe I'm wrong about this.
So there are these two steady states. So there is that one single policy change, as you say, global. So early on, tranquil times, we assume that it is not binding. It is afterwards. We have some observations from France and so on, and it seems that it was not binding in France in the 60s, but it definitely was in the 80s.
But it's there in principle, but it's just below the level where we're binding. Okay, so that's
raise the level of the minimum wage.
Contract floors, I believe, no?
Yeah. Okay, so that was my understanding of it.
With the state of the base, somewhat. Anyway.
Okay, so coming back to this, I think so the one shock is this thing in turbulence. Of course, we kind of want evidence that's really the right shock to put in there, and that there's evidence in the paper that the shock was there in the United States. So there's kind of measures of turbulence for the earnings of older workers, but of course for the experiments also important that this shock equally hits in US and Europe. So what I think nice to add is at least some suggestive evidence that Europe actually did experience that same shock. Maybe true, and it seems kind of plausible that the faster change in skills, for example, was there on both sides, but I haven't really seen formal evidence of this yet. And because this model kind of makes more, in a sense, richer predictions for what the turbulence shock does, I think it would be actually possible to kind of look at this more closely in this new version. The other question, of course, is whether what's held constant is kind of the right thing to hold constant. Many things could change. Some questions were asked. Did we really do right on the other side? One important dimension of this is it really right to assume that employment protection was really completely constant over time in these places? Now, if you follow European economic news, as I've been doing for 40 years almost, we talk about changes to employment regulation all the time. There's always discussions about that is really an important thing to do. What did they actually do? Well, there's some measures from the OECD of employment protection. Here's the employment protection index for France, Germany, Italy, United States, and you see it's actually a perfect abstraction. So you have essentially no regulation of regular employees in the United States from 85 when this index starts until the present, and essentially constant in these three major European economies. So from this measure, it seems exactly right to say that the political sphere did not change, but the economic sphere, that's where the change came from. But this is not the only index. There's also a parallel index like this for temporary employees, and there you do actually see a change. So this is the regulation of temporary employment contracts, which the distinction exists in many countries. There you see, again, no regulation, no change in the United States, but you do see at least some European countries changing this quite a bit. So in France, there's really not much of a change at all, but both in Italy and Germany, there was quite a bit of deregulation over time in terms of these temporary contracts. So that we now in Italy and Germany and other countries also have this two-part, this insider-outsider labor market, where some people have a lot of protections and others don't, which I think is an interesting feature that would also interact with the forces that are emphasized in this model. So as a German, I guess I have to say, the first big mistake in the paper is to assume that France is all of Europe. It's not. There's lots of differences across countries. If you look at outcomes, you can also see this. So this is the actual unemployment rate, the OECD unemployment rate. So this is kind of the fact that we are trying to explain. Purple is the United States. It was higher in the 70s until the 1980s. Then it becomes lower, but somewhat differently so for different countries. So in this picture, it looks like Italy and France, blue and green up here, actually do have persistently higher unemployment in the United States from the 1980s onwards. It's very much what we're trying to explain. For Germany, it's not quite true. So it was kind of more or less the same until the early 90s. And then there was a phase of high unemployment in Germany, which the Germans would claim is really just absorbing the east of Germany, and it's kind of a special factor. So it's not completely clear that thinking of one Europe here is the right abstraction. If you look at the youth unemployment, which part of this paper is about, this becomes even more pronounced. So here's youth unemployment, and this did go up a lot in Italy, and it was always high in France. If you put Spain and Greece in here, it would be even more dramatic. So there is certainly some countries that are very much characterized by very high youth unemployment. Germany is not one of them. Had always had very low youth unemployment, and even today has lower youth unemployment than the United States has. This is 15 to 24-year-olds. And we know of some features that play into this, such as the apprenticeship system, which I think would also be interesting to consider. Now, of course, there's many other things that are different across these countries that we could mention, but I think kind of this dimension is a very important one because it kind of gets at this fact that in Europe there's now many policies that are very much making a distinction between younger and older workers, such as apprenticeships, such as these insider-outsider labor markets. And given that the model is about the life cycle, I think this would be very much the first order thing to go to next, to think about what these policies do. So I think of this paper as being primarily about US versus France, which is what the figures also suggest. And I think there's more interesting work to be done on some other cases. So what I mean by these policies in particular is that the policies in the current paper, in the model, they have differential impact on young and old people, but they are uniform policies. There's one minimum wage for everybody. There's uniform unemployment rules for every worker in the model. Okay, so the uniform policy. Whereas in many European countries now, we have very explicit discrimination by age. So there's this distinction between regular and temporary contracts that in Italy, for example, make it very difficult to fire anybody who is 50 years or older, but makes it very difficult to find jobs for young people. To some extent, you have age-dependent minimum wages. And you have, so in Germany, for example, this thing is called Sozialauswahl, kind of a somewhat unfortunate term, which says that if you have layoffs, you have to fire the young guys first. If you lower production in a given establishment, you fire 10 workers, you have to select them by social criteria. Age is one of which. So there's these quite dramatic policies that give you very different treatment of young and older workers. And so given that this paper is about the life cycle, I think the next step is to put those things in there and see what they do. You also see this in statistics. So if you look, for example, at duration of employment, of job tenure, we know it's higher in Europe, and the model matches that. But if you look at tenure by age, you see these differences are much more pronounced for older workers than for younger workers. So there's a gap, but it's a gap that goes up with age also. So one last picture before I wrap up. Another thing we could think about. This picture relates employment protection, another of these OECD indices, to changes in inequality over the last, what is it? This is wrong. This is 1980 here, and this goes to 2015. So over the last, 80 to 2006, so over 26 years. I have this picture because we're working with a grad student at Northwestern on a different story for this, which has to do with technology adoption and and skill bias technical change. But I think it's also an important picture to look at for this model, because the model has this increase in turbulence, and this increase in turbulence has implications for inequality. It creates more inequality over time for these workers because some people lose their human capital. And of course, we know that another big macro trend over the last 30 years that we talk about a lot these days is large changes in inequality. Piketty talks about this, many other people too. It's particularly large change in inequality in the United States. So if you look across countries, and this measures this by the skill premium, but you can also do other measures, you find that the countries that have more employment protection actually have a much larger increase in inequality, to some extent actually declines in the skill premium, Germany, Italy, and Spain. Okay, and so you kind of wonder how are these trends related. I think you could, in fact, take a model and kind of ask how much do the policies that you have generate some of this. I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but you would think that the fact you have so much more insurance in Europe may in fact imply that you would have differential trends in inequality in response to this change in turbulence. But I think it's an important trend to look at, and I think that's something that's pretty straightforward to do. Okay, so in conclusion, I think you can think of this paper in two ways. You can think of this as a capstone of 20 years of Lundquist Sargent research on this topic. But I think the more exciting way to think about this is kind of the beginning of a new research program which really looks at the impact of labor market regulation over the life cycle of workers. Given that there's so much in the policy world that's really age specific, I think it's kind of a starting point to do a lot more of work along these lines. Final thing, I'm also here, I guess, as editor of the Journal of Red, which is where these papers are going to appear. So that's why I put here another great paper. I think it was 2 wonderful days here, and we'll have some time for discussion, but let me first thank the organizers for putting this wonderful program together. I think it's great. I'm very excited to have this stuff coming up in Red in a year. So thanks to you.
Tom, Lars, you guys want to?
I said, thank you, those are wonderful comments.
Yeah.
Do you look at what the welfare consequences are after the turbulence changes? 'Cause you see unemployment goes through the roof, but are the gains in terms of the social insurance enough to offset that in terms of welfare?
So Tom, is it, the older workers, they lose their human capital and they choose to retire because of the generosity of the benefits, right?
Younger workers lose their human capital too, but they got along.
For the younger workers, would you see a steeper earnings profile after the turbulence hits? Because they've lost human
You know
capital.
that last graph that I had?
Right.
It had these little dribbly lines. So it had some that were flat.
I would have just thought you have less human capital than what you deem was optimal. The Benford mechanism with diminishing returns would then imply.
Here's what happens. So there's a graph there that looked like this. And these were short lines. These short lines are me. I get,
You're out.
I'm out. So question. So let's say I get a new job. That's for these guys. Am I going to invest a lot in human capital? No. I'm just going to produce what I. So that's the backward inductions doing that. But the younger, and then some guys bail out. Then the younger guys.
Would invest more, right?
Yeah. They invest.
So you'd see steeper
Well, but
profile.
And you did.
And you do see it in the data. After turbulence
Oh,
hits.
that was our model.
No, I knew that. But do you have support for that in the data?
Okay, so what I know from that is the Sullivan Lalonde paper and work like that, and Ottar Katz. There's some evidence from that.
But in the model there, I mean, you're investing in something which is going to depreciate faster. If you get hit by one of these turbulent shocks, it depreciates.
Yeah, that's true.
See, but the claim is still that you invest more in this thing. I don't know, my prior would have been that you wouldn't want to invest because of the fear of depreciation,
No, but
plus
this is
the
a race.
depreciation.
This is a race.
But how about after you hit?
Absolutely.
You would invest.
It's a race between this Mortensen, Pissarides, chosen thing, but my job still, those Hall numbers, I still have my job for it.
So Does the layoff tax in Europe just prevent some of that from happening? Because people don't get laid off, the firm
No,
keeps them
so,
on
you know,
anyway,
so-
so they avoid the human
Yeah,
capital
so
loss
this-
because they
so
don't get
this-
laid off?
This emphasis on, that these risks of human capital loss, that is at exogenous layoffs. And neither Europe nor US can avoid exogenous layoffs. So there's no way of staying at work to try to avoid these shocks. So I guess they should be interpreted, some industry disappearing from the economy. And, the important thing is that Europe and the US should be very similar in technologies and it's just response to policy.
Well, we don't have any unions in the United States now, except public and Europe.